Hello, friends, and welcome back to this ongoing work of exploring the essays in the externalization of the hierarchy. It's going to take us pretty well through the Second World War and through the years which follow until the death of Alice Bailey, which occurred in Sagittarius of 1949. We are approaching, as you know, the great conclave of 2025. And around that time, the Tibetan will begin to work on his third installment of bridging treatises toward the New Age. And our purpose with all of these commentaries, some of them in earlier days done in a written form, and lately more conversationally, as the time required to do them is extensive, and perhaps I move a little faster with the videos. The purpose of them is to prepare us in terms of assimilation. The Tibetan has given us more than we can ever assimilate. He's assured us of that fact. And no matter how long you study what he's given, you're always seeing more. And sometimes I think I might have absorbed 2 or 3%. Maybe I flatter myself and say, oh, I think I've absorbed 7 or 8%. And then I see what's there, and I realize the absorption level is lower. So let's see what we can do to make all of this part of our consciousness, part of our approach to life, part of our meditations, part of our service. Let's see what we can do to bring his words into living reality as we work on the service we can render to our fellow human beings. We're talking about divine approaches, and when an avatar comes closer vibratorily to humanity, that is considered an approach. Should the Christ manifest on the physical plane in his Maya Virupa, that is an approach. Should the entire hierarchy externalize, or at least a considerable number of those within it, that is an approach. So whenever the divine, the higher spiritual centers and sources come closer to humanity and begin to communicate with humanity more fully, begin to infuse the environment in which humanity lives, that is a divine approach. And they are of all kinds, some of them lesser, some of them much greater, some of them really a part of planetary history, some of them part really only of the history of humanity. So let's see here what we have just been through. I sometimes segue, but I'm not going to go through all of this, except to say that DK speaks of messengers coming who embody divine intention, and that these appearances can come more often now because of the greater sensitivity of humanity and its ability to think. That there is a true progress in humanity towards the good, the true, and the beautiful. All of this in spite of the suffering in the war. I suppose it's an amazing thing to wake up on the other side and to realize you've been through a kind of dream. Waking up there with relief, I suppose, compared to waking up normally from our dream state here on the physical plane and say, thank goodness that was just a dream. Well, what really is the dream? That's the question. So the approaches are becoming more effective and synchronized with the state of man, and through them, humanity in its higher brackets is learning how to invoke the divine approach. It always invokes unconsciously, and it was the upreaching of the mass of human beings under extreme suffering that formed an invocation which the Christ was able to guide towards very high sources. And these sources, their intervention, as we're going to learn here, turned the tide of the war. When indeed there might have been the failure of humanity to escape a condition of bondage and slavery for who knows how long. And after the war, the Tibetan warned about the danger of living in an armed camp, which would eventually lead to an explosion. Well, what you can imagine is the end of human civilization through atomic warfare. Now, you would say any sane leader would avoid that, but just because one is a leader, there's no guarantee that one is sane. And then later, Foster Bailey on the First Ray in the early 50s, in the books that he was writing, assured us that he had some conversations with the Tibetan, and as it looked at that time, there would be no atomic war. Well, we can hope so. The weapons that are being devised now, laser weapons and other things that might knock out the entire electromagnetic grid in any country, could send a civilization back to a much earlier stage. So we have to do everything we can esoterically with using the methods in which we have been instructed to forestall the outer eruption of the inner war between the dweller and angel of humanity. That war has to go on, and it's in anticipation of the reappearance of the Christ. So when he does reappear, it will signal that a certain proportion of humanity has taken the first initiation, enough to leaven the whole mass of humanity, and to have humanity no longer be considered simply as the aspirant or disciple, but as a probationary initiate. Revelation is coming. There are wonders connected with the New Age, the forces of materialism, or I might call them the forces which promote superficial perception, want to stop that entry into wider opportunity and finally abundant life in any way they can. And the hierarchy and its initiates, disciples, and even aspirants oppose those forces in the way that they can. So I guess we number ourselves among those who are opposing the forces of obstruction and who want to see humanity enter the New Age in the right way. Now, we are on page 409, about halfway through the book. My very long programs probably have to cease now because there's a preparation for the upcoming conference on the third ray, forerunners of the light, illuminating and manifesting the divine plan. Well, we are all that, and even if you run into this much, much later, you know you are a forerunner of the growing light that will manifest in the age of Aquarius when the Christ appears, supported by the avatar of synthesis, the spirit of peace, and the Buddha, and guiding humanity towards that life more abundantly, which the Christ said he would bring. Now we're looking at these divine approaches and, all the different classifications of teachers that we've had and hierarchical representatives. Two major approaches, it says here, are to be found in the past history of the race, and both are of such significance that it would be well to note them here. They lie so far back in human history that we have only myth and monument to indicate their happening. I think that's very interesting about monument because, Master Moria basically says every legend is true. That's quite a statement. And monuments have been erected to commemorate great events. The first great approach to the divine, of the divine to man, caused the appearance of the human soul in the causal body, let us say, and the adding of another kingdom in nature to the three, mineral, vegetable, animal, already existing, the kingdom of man. The fourth kingdom of nature appeared on earth. So this is the first great approach. And it was also an initiation of our planetary logos through his fourth chain and on his fourth globe. Okay, so let's build that one up a little bit. I know when you take a look at all these colors and changes of size, you might wonder how in the world can anybody make one's way through all this. But it's in the effort to have things really catch the eye that I'm doing it this way. Eons passed away whilst primitive man continued to evolve, and when the second great approach took place, the spiritual hierarchy of our planet, of the whole planetary scheme, I guess, drew nearer to humanity. Okay, so let's make that of a different color. And we'll increase the size there of that. The spiritual way to God was opened for those who consciously can move forward, who can definitely demonstrate the Christ spirit, and who earnestly seek enlightenment and liberation. The true appeal of Christ's words, "Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free," urges them forward into the light through the gate of initiation and onto that path which shineth evermore until the perfect day. The path of the just is as a shining light which shineth evermore until the day be with us, until the perfect day. At the time of the second great approach, the fact of the existence of the spiritual hierarchy, of the door to initiation, and of the way to sacrifice first dawned on human consciousness? Well, the Sanat Kumara and the Lords of the Flame came about 18.5 million years ago. You can't throw around these big figures with any degree of accuracy. But when they came, was it that animal man of the time realized the possibility of initiation? I'm not sure about that. From that moment, men have found the way and have moved out of the human kingdom into the spiritual. They have transformed their human consciousness into divine awareness. The kingdom of man and the kingdom of God were brought into relationship. Religion became a factor in the development of the human spirit, and God drew nearer to his own. We might say, perhaps during the opening of the second petal, of those who could recognize God. God transcendent first conditioned man's concept of deity, then God as a national controller took possession of man's minds, and the Jehovah concept as depicted in the Jewish dispensation appeared, and this is still a primitive concept. Next, God was seen as the perfected human being, and the divine God-man walked the earth in the person of the Christ. And today we have the rapidly growing emphasis on God immanent in every human being. Such have been the results of the second great approach, and such have been the results of the work of the world's saviors and teachers down the ages, culminating in the work of the Christ, who summed up in himself the unfoldments of the past and the hope of the future. Well, he's not being too specific about when this occurred, not too specific. Let's see here. Because we do know that when hierarchy appeared, well, except for those who had come in from other systems in Lemuria, had come in from the third or previous solar system, which expressed the third ray particularly, and were known as the nomads, coming over from that system. They might have been in a position, and in the book Esoteric Psychology 1, it talks about those who in Lemurian days were ready for initiation. But they made the mistake of talking about it, and complications resulted. And among those were the ancestors of what we call the Jews today. Two other great potential initiates were the founders of other races and other groups. So at the time of the second great approach, the fact of the existence of the spiritual hierarchy and the open door to initiation and of the way of sacrifice first dawned on human consciousness. And let's just say that since there was a form of initiation in Lemuria, this second great approach must have occurred within Lemuria, but it is hard to see it related directly to the coming of the lords of the flame, though everything in a way derived from that. So that was still, that coming of the lords of the flame still had something to do with the individualization process, and man had to grow considerably before he could think of the way towards God, and before the first initiation, relating the etheric and physical in the correct way could have occurred. DK is not being entirely specific here about when the second great approach occurred, but he does say aeons passed away. Now, in this case, an aeon must be less than a round, because we can't have many rounds passing away. We're still in the fourth round, in which individualization of Earth humanity took place. But whatever measure this may be, Platonic years, who knows how it's being measured? It's a deliberately vague term, Platonic years, and, okay, wait a second, and I'll just put the question mark. While primitive man continued to evolve, and when the second great approach took place, the spiritual hierarchy of our planet, and we might say, from this perspective, already in place, from the time of the coming of the, well, I'm going to make a thing here, LOTFS, and we're going to call that Lords of the Flame. Not at all part of our Earth humanity, but coming with Sanat Kumara from the time of the coming of the Lords of the Flame, drew nearer. So, trying to pinpoint this, it's the time, let's just call it a time when the first possibilities of initiation were presented to the humanity of that period. And there was some sufficient evolution, because we had not only Earth humanity, but we had the humanity present even before individualization on our planet, coming from the previous major solar system. And so maybe such a one was the Buddha, maybe, because it says that the seeds of the first solar system, the first major solar system, really ripened in him. So when it became possible for the more advanced Lemurian types, even if they were not individualized in Lemuria, but came from earlier places, the Moonchain people did not come to Lemuria in general, although the Buddha, if he came from the previous major solar system, would have been an exception, because then he would have been both from that earlier system and on the moon chain, about which we read a fair amount, where he qualified himself to take the third initiation but could not take it because it was not offered, and then with the Christ later in a fourth ray ashram he took that initiation. Anyway, the possibility of initiation opened up, and humanity, let's just say, hierarchy made itself more known, and the potentials it offered were made more known. Now, this was a movement towards the fifth kingdom of nature, just as the earlier approach opened up the existence of the fourth kingdom of nature. Well, we're not going to get the precision here we would like, but I think, for precision, such as we can have, consult with Philip Lindsay and his book, The Hidden History of Humanity, because he's done, of those I know, the most scholarly research on these earlier time periods. So, at the time of the second great approach, the fact of the existence of the spiritual hierarchy, of the door to initiation, and of the way to way of sacrifice first dawned on the human consciousness. The hierarchy had been there, I suspect, but as a body and regarding the potentials it could offer, I think there had to be an approach to signal that to the advanced man of the period. So let's just say this was almost certainly, because I can't be sure, but almost certainly after the coming of the Lords of the Flame, the establishment of Shambhala on earth. Sorry. The establishment of Shambhala on earth and the establishment of the earliest incarnation of the spiritual hierarchy. Okay, so two great approaches so far. One which created the fourth kingdom of nature, and one which opened the door to the advanced men of the Lemurian period, and there were such, which opened the door toward the fifth kingdom of nature. Now, sometimes the way the fifth kingdom is described, when we look at that blue circle, even as an aspirant or a disciple who is not initiated yet, you can be within that blue circle, which signifies the hierarchy and thus the fifth kingdom, but real establishment of oneself within the fifth kingdom occurs, I think, at the third initiation. So, you might say of those of us who might be probationary initiates of the first or second degree, that we are still, well, we have one foot in the fifth kingdom, so to speak, but we're still very much in the consciousness of the fourth kingdom. And as the sacrifice petals begin to open, and our concern becomes sacrifice on behalf of others and the divine plan, we gain our true entry solidly into the fifth kingdom. A master is a mature member of the fifth kingdom. And from the time the first initiation is taken, there's already some degree of participation in the energy generated in the kingdom of souls. Now, one day when we know the cycles and the timing of all this, we'll see how it occurred, and we'll see maybe how it was meant to occur and how human decision entered, either, most likely delaying the process, or maybe sometimes facilitating the process. All right. So, yeah, these are interesting ideas. Here I'm going to put them: progressive concepts of deity. You know, the awe-inducing God, the thunder, the lightning, the floods, the winds, this is God speaking. And we're told, that the sinner shall reap the whirlwind, the tornado. I mean, this is God transcendent. But then there are these national gods, of which Jehovah, a being connected with the moon chain, I think, is an example. And Jehovah doesn't care too much for the other groups and races and peoples. He's pretty much out after the advancement of the Hebrew group. So it's still a separative God. And then, so transcendent is first. And then the Jehovah concept appeared, and a national controller, that was next. And it's amazing to me, that we still, in our Western traditions, speak of God as Jehovah. It's such a reduction of the God concept of which we are capable. But old habits die hard, And then God as the perfected human being. And there were the God kings, of the earlier times, but maybe we're talking specifically of Christ as the perfect man. And today, God immanent in every human being. Paul saying, "Know ye not that ye are gods?" And the answer to that has to be no. We don't know that. We don't think of that particularly. We would think of that as hubris, as overweening pride, as an attempt to deny that we were conceived in sin and are inherently sinful, even though we're told that we are gods. So many people have to get out of those old ideas of man as a filthy lower being in need of redemption because of the very way in which he was born. So the world's saviors and teachers finally culminating in the work of the Christ. There have been many world teachers, but think of it, the Christ individualized in Middle Lemuria has outstripped them all. The Buddha is slightly ahead of the Christ, but the two of them, unlike the previous teachers, have had the cosmic touch. In other words, contact with the cosmic planes. The Christ with the cosmic astral, the plane of pure love, and the Buddha with the cosmic mental, from which the real light comes. Well, a third approach is now possible and will take place once the world war is over and man, purified by fire and suffering, has set his house in order and is ready, therefore, for the new revelation. A third approach is coming. So, let's just make sure that these words, second great approach, are much enlarged, and second great approach, I'll enlarge it even a couple of times. And we'll go over here to the First great approach, we have to be grateful that divinity is for giving, that the higher beings, when the time is right, want to give all they have to assist the emanative retraction of the lower beings who wandered far into that kind of circumscription that matter provides. So we're in the middle of these amazing days when, if we would just be cognizant, great approaches are occurring. And that's why it's so important for us not to live in a business as usual way. These are tumultuous spiritual times, full of opportunity, full of danger, the danger of retardation and the possible ruination of the whole experiment to raise up an adequate race of human beings. And those of us who know something about occultism, esotericism, even though, we're standing on the shoulders of giants, and we know because we've been taught, we don't know, we hypothesize the accuracy of that which is suggested to us by trusted teachers. Even the Tibetan says he hasn't been to the cosmic astral plane. Then how can he speak of it? How can he speak of the cosmic mental plane? How can he speak of the solar logos? The teaching allows him to do that, and the pure reason that arises in his consciousness, because he has made all the preparation to become a divine intuitive. That's what allows him to speak of it. And maybe we can speak too before the day when the kind of vehicle we inhabit will allow us to experience at first hand these cosmic planes and the kind of experiences one can have on these cosmic planes. I mean, the times are filled with amazing opportunity, unsuspected by the millions and billions of people. And what has to be offered to them is a great incentive towards expansions and deepenings and opportunities which they could never imagine. And their holding on to the past childish formulations only prevents them from moving forward into realization. We have to, I don't know, I'm trying to think, when you have a little toddler, let's say, and that toddler is holding tight to some toy, but you have, for the toddler, a new gift, something much more interesting that would delight the toddler even more. How do you take away that toy which he or she is clutching and substitute the new toy which will give far greater interest and delight and growth to that toddler? How do you avoid the inevitable struggle, battle, tears, and all the rest of it as you try to substitute one for another? I'm sure many of us have been in that situation. I know I have. Or shall you just forget it and just let them hang on to the toy they seem to love because they love it, and one day they'll throw it out of the playpen and start crying for something new, and you wanted to offer it a long time ago. Okay. So the third great approach. Now we call these, periods of radiation, periods of ingathering, and there was a word I've just been recently using. It slips my mind right now, but it signifies opportunity. And somewhere in this book, in a few programs before, I made a big deal of it only to forget it right now, but well, let's see if what page are we on after all? 556. And so if I just say radiation, where will that take me? Buddha came, radiation, and consummation. Maybe that's it. His radiation will reach forth and surround. 5 results. The ingathering, a period of ingathering or radiation when the Buddha came. What's this? Irradiation? Okay, and what do we have here? Maybe I have it now. The equivalent, well, it's the word approaches, isn't it? An equivalence between ingathering, radiation, and approaches. No wonder it was right in front of my eyes, and that's why I didn't see it. Okay. So every once in a while, the techniques of the technical advantages of these word processing programs comes to the rescue. Well, let's see where we are here. Yeah, when you stop seeing the colors, you know you've gone far enough. A third great approach is now possible. Approach radiation ingathering. So I'll just put those down. Oh, no, that's not going to be the case. Approach radiation ingathering. And, DK says, gather them into the ashrams and use the book Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 1, to do it. It is such an inspiring book, and when you see the masterful way that DK psychologically and spiritually handles his students, is now possible and will take place. I guess this must be an is, and if not, it's good enough. Okay. Is now possible and will take place once the World War is over. Remember, we're in 1943 now. I think this is May of 43, when that important Wesak festival would be occurring, moving towards June. I hope I'm correct. I'm sometimes skip over where we are. Could we be in June 1943? I think we're in May 1943. Well, anyway, we're in the middle of 1943. A third great approach is now possible and will take place once the World War is over and man, purified by fire and suffering, has set his house in order, hopefully making sure that the devils eager to take up residence within his newly cleaned house are fast barred to it because he is attentive to its condition. He has set his house in order and is ready, therefore, for a new revelation. For this coming revelation, the work of the Buddha and the Christ has been preparatory. They embody in themselves 2 lesser approaches. And through their united effort, humanity throughout the world has been prepared to play its part in this third approach. And, I kind of wonder here whether the combined work of the Buddha and the Christ, along with that of the Avatar of Synthesis and the Spirit of Peace, might not. So I'm just going to say are the principal characters uh, or actors, let me say that, actors in this new approach: the Buddha, the Christ, the avatar of synthesis, and the spirit of peace. Are they those? How shall we name this new approach? Three is the charm, really, and two is always preparatory. And then sometimes, you kind of wonder, when you think of the Great War, does it have only two phases? The Second World War might have been considered the Armageddon and maybe the worst of three. And are we in the midst psychologically of a third war in which humanity is being tested to see if, after all, it has learned anything? It's 2019. I'm following the resistance of good and caring people against orchestrated selfishness based on naive, narcissistic egotism. And, it's not just in one man that is focused, but in many leaders who are ruthless in their climb to the top. And that's how they got there. But it doesn't mean that they are psychologically sound. And sometimes the psychiatrists warn us of their potentials, but for various secondary reasons, we ignore what those professionals say, and we allow them to pursue their way, which leads all concerned into deep difficulty. Anyway, a third great approach. What does he say about it? The Buddha came embodying in himself a great divine principle or quality. He was the conveyor of enlightenment to the world, and so often the third initiation is spoken of in terms of enlightenment and illumination. He was the Lord of Light. As is always the case, he reenacted in himself, for the instruction of his disciples, the processes of illumination and became the illumined one. Now this was a touch from the cosmic mental plane. We are told in the scriptures of India that he achieved illumination under the tree, just as Christ achieved the liberation of the human spirit upon the tree set up on Golgotha. The place of the skull where those crucifixion crosses were mounted. Light, wisdom, and reason, as divine yet human attributes, were focused in the Buddha. He proved the possibility of men achieving the illumination, this illumination. Well, it would be of a lesser kind than he, as the head of the hierarchy, could achieve. That was an astounding contact. He challenged the people to tread the path of illumination, of which wisdom, mental perception, and intuition are aspects. So here is a great paragraph on the Buddha. He came embodying in himself a great divine principle or quality, the Lord of Light. And, as a Taurus, we sometimes forget the light-bearing potential of Taurus and of one of its rulers, Venus, and even of another of its rulers, Vulcan, so close to the sun. Sometimes you wonder whether the luminosity of Vulcan might be the very thing that's preventing it from being discovered. Certainly, Vulcan is responsible for increasing the intensity of light in forms usually ruled by Mars as a much duller and less sacred planet. So, Christ hovered over the cross, I guess you could say, but it was Master Jesus experiencing the crucifixion, yet a kind of sixth initiation, a kind of extraordinary compassion, a kind of touch with the cosmic astral plane was occurring for Christ in that crucifixion episode. And what was it, the night before, he had been in the Garden of Gethsemane. How fascinating that he had to be comforted by an angel from Capricorn, whatever the status of this angel. And most human beings reading about this say, oh, well, he realized he faced a gruesome death and he needed to be comforted. But I think it was for, other reasons involving acquiescence to the will of God. And you never know, because the gold and silver threads of that story are not yet separated out in a meaningful and accurate way. Who's at home? Is it Jesus there? Is it the Christ within the body of Jesus? Is it the Christ overshadowing Jesus? All of that has to be disentangled. And DK tells us that it will be. One day, the gold and the silver threads will be separated out, and we will know the whole story. But what do you do with humanity meanwhile? They've been given a kind of myth, a kind of story that is much simpler than the real events, because they're not ready to think in terms of spiritual occultism. And when you try to encourage them to do so, you may be taking your life in your hands, People will fight very hard to hang on to that which reassures them and gives them kind of a perpetuity in the form that they have accepted as being themselves, or being themselves. Anyways, they think they are that form, and they hang on for dear life. But these, I am the light of the world, well, thus said the Christ, and certainly the Buddha could have said that as well. Just start thinking about who you are and break free of the boundaries of distinctiveness and enter pervasion. Don't stop at what appears to be the boundary of your vehicles and the environment, but go beyond all of that into a pervading something, which might be pervading light, pervading love, pervading sacrificial will, all-pervading being. And then we're coming closer to identifying our true, identity, to recognizing our true identity. I'm finding so many wonderful things here in my, that will aid and abet my sixth-ray tendencies of proselytizing. I guess we all know when we've come off a certain ray, and I still have a big hangover of the sixth ray, and I say, wow, this is really good for people who are nominal Christians and who don't like the Buddha very much. I say, what a good paragraph this is, and how I want to send it to potential converts. Oh, it's a terrible thing to lapse back into the way of thinking that probably was prominent in some previous incarnations. But we will know where we've been and what we've done. And I think it's, somehow quite interesting, really, to trace all of that. Okay, so let's keep going here, because now we'll talk about the Christ in a similar way. Then came the next great teacher, the Christ. He seems to have taken over the role of head of the hierarchy, shortly after the Buddha's last and most popular incarnation. I think the Buddha did a lot of overshadowing of various of his disciples along the way, but we know him as the Buddha, overshadowing Gautama or the Prince Siddhartha. I mean, however we want to look at it, the two are not the same in my book, in my view. It was the same kind of thing as Christ in relation to Jesus, and the Buddha took, I think, his position in relation to the prince of that kingdom in India, who was a high being and needed to take the fourth initiation, whereas the Buddha had taken the fifth and was in line to take the sixth, just as, in other words, that Gautama, or whatever name we want to give to the prince, Siddhartha Gautama, had taken the third initiation, and his goal was the fourth. Jesus had taken the third initiation as the high priest Joshua, and was inclined to take the fourth. Both the Buddha and the Christ were initiates of the fifth degree on their way to taking the sixth initiation. And so they made of these students of theirs a means of approaching the physical plane. And in each case, there was an elevation, the Buddha to the sixth degree and the Prince to the fourth, and Christ to the sixth degree and Jesus to the fourth. Now, these methods of inner working, they are not widely accepted, they're not understood, and it will be a while before this type of divine mediumship, rather than, obsession and possession and all these dark things. People are always ready to believe that, that you send out your spirit against someone else and you take possession of them and you obsess them and all that. The negative we seem to be ready to accept, but that which is positive we do not as readily accept. So then came the next great teacher, the Christ. He embodied in himself a still greater divine principle or aspect, that of love, whilst at the same time embracing within himself all that the Buddha had of light. So Christ was the expression of both light and love, and that's important to understand. And of course, it kind of tells us, that one day this is the second solar system, and we have a second ray soul on our planet, second ray soul for our solar logos, but the important thing is to realize that this is not the system in which the first ray is going to gain its maximum power and expressiveness. So we'll just have to see. I mean, we live on a first ray planet, but this is not the solar system in which the full power of the first ray is going to be expressed. But still, another will come, and we'll have to, at some point, bring as an avatar the great first ray. So it's interesting that, sometimes we learn that the aspects of divinity are all equal and all necessary, and that's true. But in terms of depth and succession, it seems that love supersedes light, and can it be that will supersede love? We're told this fascinating and almost bizarre thing, that in the next solar system, those who try to hold back humanity, whoever these lords are, as there's always going to be stragglers and failures, and those who hang on to their previous development as if no other type of development equal in power and in usefulness was possible for them. they will they will hold back through love those who try to express the next and greater divine aspect, the divine will. So it will not be so much through light, but through love that the negative forces will work, retarding the entrance into will. And then what shall we say when we enter into pure being, which is inclusive of will, love, and light? Will there be a retardation there too? Because, attachment is the issue, and the lack of faith that we shall encounter something even greater on ahead. We don't believe it, and we hang on to what we've got and say, this is as good as I can do, and I want to hang on to this. And I don't trust any further kind of development. And it takes some courage and some leap of faith. I'm always telling you about the movies I've seen, right? Not that I see so many, but they make an impression upon me. And here was Harrison Ford playing, what role did he play? Anyway, the sort of archaeologist who's an adventurer at the same time. And he's in some cave-like structure, and there's a big gap in front of him. And he knows if he stays, he'll die, and if he goes forward, he will fall down this ravine thousands of feet deep, and he'll die. So it's a question of faith. He knows some mantrams, and he knows what's been said to him about how to reach the Holy Grail, because that's what's on the other side, And that tells us something too, doesn't it? That if you want to reach the Holy Grail, which I suppose, well, it's supposedly the cup that the Christ drank from at the Last Supper, but it's the whole causal body, the whole fulfilled causal body, that stage of development. You have to have faith if you want to reach that. So what few things that he has as a guide tell him, step forward in faith. And he just knows he's going to his death, but he has the faith. And he steps forward, and suddenly up comes a bridge of support that allows him to cross over this deep, deep chasm. Well, I think there are moments. He didn't take a leap of faith, he took a step of faith, and that might be quite good enough. And we have to do that too on our way to fulfillment. But if we have been successful in meditating, and we can really say that faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen, that we have touched something of the quality of that towards which we are moving. We've touched that energy that we haven't apparently reached yet. Somehow we've reached it through faith. So there is a comforting in having touched that quality, and still an act of courage is needed. Master Moria would say, well, you have to be the daring one. You have to be the daring one. And he gives this wonderful little book of daring, just a few pages, in Agni Yoga. And what does he say? Something like, and then the least of these turned to the morning stars, the starry heavens, and said, I'm paraphrasing here, but it's close, "Hail, brothers." And in that salutation of daring, his ego vanished. So the brotherhood of all life, when realized, rids us of the lower boundaries of lower ego, and we begin to permeate. I am the light of the world. I am the love of the world. I am the will, the great will. I am pure being. We go beyond our usual boundaries. Hail, brothers. And in that salutation of daring, his ego vanished. And then the least of these turned to the morning stars and said, Hail, brothers. Now, it makes me want to kind of, it makes me want to see if I have it here. No matches and daring. Maybe I'll try daring, not darings, but there's something here from the Tibetan about to know. How does it say? To will, to know, to dare, and to keep silent. But the one I'm looking for, we'll just go to the Agni Yoga Society, and you'll find this in the early pages of the book Agni Yoga, and it's so, I might just say, encouraging. It arouses the feeling of daring. Now, there's more than a feeling, of course. So this is the okay, so this is the end, or let's just say now 1 hour and 6 minutes have elapsed. I really, I probably can't do a long program here. Maybe if I do another hour, that will be something. We will see. So the Christ and the Buddha, and yet their approaches so far have been considered as minor approach when compared to the approach coming. Two lesser approaches. They embodied in themselves through two lesser approaches. And through their united effort, humanity throughout the world, both hemispheres, has been prepared to play its part in the third approach, where I think the new group of world servers will be quite important. But, certain great extraplanetary avatars have come into the picture. Through their work, therefore, the Buddha and the Christ, therefore, there is now possible a deeper reaction to and a broad comprehension of the work and influence of those great lives who are waiting today to help humanity. So we might say these are the avatars. That name has been nicely adopted, but much reduced by people who offer courses on becoming an avatar and so forth. Well, at least the idea is getting out there. The work of these two sons of God produced, among many results, the following. So, results of the work of the Buddha and the Christ. They embodied in themselves certain cosmic principles, and by the work and sacrifice, their work and sacrifice, certain divine potencies poured through and upon the race, stimulating intelligence into wisdom and emotion into love. The Buddha, when he achieved illumination, let's call it the 6th degree, let in, as it were, a flood of light upon life and world problems. He formulated this revelation into the 4 noble truths. His group of disciples, arhats mostly, those becoming arhats, erected a structure of truth which, by the power of collective thought, has flooded mankind with light. Oh, it's so exciting. I remember the feeling of excitement I had when Tuya and I, some people made it possible for us to visit the great gathering in 2011 of the Dalai Lama offering the Kala Chakra, and thousands of people were there. 18,000, I don't know, it was a lot. And there was such an excitement, to be in the presence of this obvious wisdom, which had this lineage in a way, all the way back to the Lord of Light, the Buddha. So they embodied in themselves certain cosmic principles, and their work and sacrifice certain divine potencies poured in. I think, we may venerate the Buddha and the Christ, and millions do, but we just don't understand yet what they really did. Just a few programs ago, when I read how it was the Christ that made it possible for the rising invocation of the masses, and I suppose the collateral or combined invocation of those who were better trained. There was the Christ who made it possible for that invocative stream to reach the Lords of Liberation. I was just taken back because touched, you might say, really. That was what swung the tide of the war. So Christ really is the Savior, Within the law, he could do that because the invocation was adequate and it was genuine. And he was simply the guiding principle, guiding it toward registration by the Lords of Liberation in Shambhala. So, intelligence must become wisdom, and emotion must become love. And I think we see that in certain of the transferences that occur as the chakras are moving streams of energy one to another. So they embodied in themselves certain cosmic principles. And, he's not elaborating here. And by their work and sacrifice, certain divine potencies poured through upon the race, stimulating intelligence into wisdom and emotion into love. I mean, talk about the big picture, Here we are concerned about our little activities and affairs within the lower 18 subplanes, and here are great initiates from the perspective of the becoming seventh degree, we might say, who are making huge transformations possible. So one day we will know, because as the Christ says, greater things than I do will you do, and all of us will find our way through emanative retraction back to identification as the one and only being in cosmos. Of course, there you have to remove a lot of differentiation caused by partial perception, superficial perception. And when you manage to blast those or dissolve or whatever, those ring past knots or rings past knot, then always a new expansion of identity occurs until the next ring past knot, and until the next and next, and always there will be a lessening of distinction and an increase of sameness, essential sameness, until we reach the one and only identity in cosmos, which we are, and then you have the ring past knot of any universe to deal with, and that too goes through the real Mahapralaya, and then what are you left with? The absolute deity which you are, and it's a post-pralaic, pre-universal deity, and then what? Superordinate number is dissolved into no number, and that is absoluteness. And of that causeless cause, we can only say that it is forever unchanging, has been forever unchanging, will be forever unchanging, using, of course, words connected with time, as in our concrete mind and speech we can't do much more. But we shall return the good, the bad, the indifferent, because you can only be good and bad within the context of a certain intended pattern. So this is really, really beyond good and evil, although we would tend to call it the infinitization of goodness, I suppose. All right. Now, we're looking at here the gifts that have been given by the Buddha and the Christ. So great lives are waiting. Let's just say great and greater lives are waiting to share their potency. You notice how occasionally in the written form of the teaching here, DK or the editor or whomever will capitalize the pronoun just to indicate, who we may be talking about. And great capital L lives gives us an idea here. They're waiting today to help humanity. That has to do with the avatar of synthesis and the spirit of peace, particularly. The Buddha will be constantly offering his help, and the Christ, with an amazing task before him, will do everything he can, literally, to save humanity from its lower impulsions, which could see the destruction of the human race as presently constituted. Okay, so what are the results? And we've looked at one set of results, that certain cosmic principles have been brought in, and it speaks mostly of the Buddha here, but the Christ had the cosmic touch too. Through the message of the Buddha, man has for the first time grasped the cause of his constant distaste and dissatisfaction, and has learnt that the way of release is to be found in detachment, dispassion, discrimination. What I suppose that means in this sequence: physical detachment, emotional dispassion, mental discrimination. Where these are present, there is rapid release from the wheel of rebirth. So the Buddha somehow really drove this lesson home to us, to humanity, and great is our debt as a result, to have such a brother in the high heavens who is teaching us how to release our glamorous, illusory fascination with superficial perceptions. I mean, if we are a materialist, our perceptions are superficial. We love the formulation we see before us. It's all right, but if we cling to it and forget its cause, then we bind ourselves. So the way of release has been learned, and he somehow stimulated accepted discipleship, and continues to do so because of his choice. He wasn't going to take that. He wasn't intended to take the path of earth service. As a matter of fact, at some point it's mentioned that he was meant to take the path to Sirius, but probably will not pursue that path now. And that's all that's said right at the moment. But basically, we have to find the reality of these inner states to which reference is made. by the Tibetan. These are real things. They take place behind the scenes. They take place behind the superficial perceptions of these, what does he call them, aggregates, or, it's some congestions, yeah. We are viewing congestions of atomic matter, and they take certain form before our eyes, and we cling to them as if they were reality, because it is the reality to which we have been most exposed. We cling to these things. Now, through the message of the Christ, three concepts emerge into racial consciousness: the value of the individual and the necessity for tensity of effort on his part. Okay, and hence the struggle and the striving all under the sixth ray. But DK said, well, now what is the ray of Buddhism? And he looked at it as it presently exists and said, well, it has to be very largely the sixth ray. And that is interesting because you usually think about Buddhism as a mental faith, third ray, and involving the ray of the great teacher of Buddhism, the second ray, actually 2 and 3. But he's looking at maybe how Buddhism has been presented and how people relate to it now, and he mentions the sixth ray. The value of the individual and the necessity for tensity of effort on his part. The opportunity which was to be presented to humanity to take a tremendous step forward and undergo the new birth or the first initiation. So let's just say, all right, through the message of the Christ, 3 important concepts are emerging or have emerged into racial consciousness: the value of the individual and the necessity for tensity of effort, so working at a point of tension. And we don't relax upon the way as we strive towards that which the Christ recommended. But that's also true of the Buddha. We have to be ever vigilant in the life process in order to carry out the kinds of recognitions, or to experience the kinds of recognitions that the Buddha said we could experience. So the opportunity which was to be presented to humanity to take a tremendous step forward and undergo the new birth, the first initiation, or in other words, coming from the Christ, the opportunity to be born again. And that's what that first initiation will mean. And then there will come the second death and still higher births. Always when we go into new states of awareness, it's a kind of birth, and there are birthing pains associated with it as we let go of the previous attachment. Now, of course, there's less pain when we do let go, and if we hang on for dear life and are ripped away from our attachment, our clutching hands still hanging on to the vestiges of that which we want to cling to, the pain is greater. And the method whereby this next step could be taken in our new age voice for us, in the words, love your neighbor as yourself. I sometimes think love your neighbor as if he were yourself. I mean, I know it means love your neighbor in a way as to the same degree you love yourself, assuming that people in the selfish state love themselves preeminently. But love your neighbor as if he were yourself, which he is. It also means that to me. Individual effort, group opportunity, and men's identification with each other, Such is the message of the Christ. So, he just makes it easier and easier to understand the great contributions of these two transmitting avatars. Not just teaching avatars, not just racial avatars, but transmitting avatars, and who have swayed hemispheres. And of course, the whole idea of group consciousness begins to come in with the first initiation, and everybody is of value. Some people are treated as throwaway people. People in power look at them and say, well, what difference does it make if a few thousand of these or a few thousand of those die or are eliminated? Okay, so what? In the greater scheme of things, it just doesn't make any difference. And they even make these decisions unaware that every eliminated person will be subject to the law of cyclic opportunity and will have a fresh start. So they really are disrespecting the life of another. But these are the ways of going forward, and as the second-ray soul of our planet becomes more powerful, one of the ways that we can conform to its emergence and even assist its emergence through the hierarchy and into humanity is to love your neighbor as yourself, love your neighbor as if he were yourself. Now, maybe not everybody is going to interpret it that way, but I think it's legitimate. You can interpret it in that way. And if you practice that, some amazing things happen. I had an experience once where, I was looking imaginatively at it was some Waisak festival, and I was looking at the Chohans as heads of the ashram, just picturing them. And suddenly I just realized they were one being. And it was an impressive moment. I didn't have to convince myself. It was just evident. And then the possibility then of blending their one beingness with the being of yourself. And suddenly you are the being that they are, and it's all one being. That's what we want to achieve on various rays. Maybe the most illustrative ray and its mantram is the second ray with the mantram, naught is but me. And if one can just practice that, find a way to make that realization true for your consciousness, then a great achievement will have transpired. In the message of the Buddha, we have three methods whereby the personality can be changed and prepared to be a conscious expression of divinity. Okay, so something just happened there. Yeah, that's what happened. Don't want to eliminate the text, All right, so detachment is the first. Sometimes I think of detachment not only in a physical sense. I think of it as the attitude of the soul towards its instrument, and maybe the attitude of the spirit monad towards its still more complicated instrument involving the spiritual triad and the causal body and the personality. And then I substitute the word discipline for what has to be applied. Well, it has to be applied everywhere, but I think of the physical disciplines and how that word can be applied to the physical plane. Through detachment, the brain consciousness or state of awareness, embodying physical recognition of inner causes, is withdrawn or abstracted from the things of the senses and from the calls of the lower nature. Detachment is in reality the imposition of a new rhythm or habit reaction upon the cells of the brain, which render the brain unaware of the lure of the world of sensory perception. And thus is the third aspect of divinity transcended in one of its lower guises or aspects. So, detachment is looked at. Consciousness is no longer captivated by the sensory input. The brain consciousness or state of awareness, usually embodying physical recognition of inner causes, is withdrawn or abstracted from the things of the senses and from the calls of the lower nature. So you do see these yogis in deep meditation, quite unaware of what is transpiring on the outer plane. Their consciousness is focused elsewhere in potentially many states of increasing detachment and states of heightening points of tension, and therefore states of heightening and deepening revelation. So what is detachment really? Now that is an interesting definition. It is in reality the imposition of a new rhythm or habit reaction upon the cells of the brain, which renders the brain unaware of the lure of the world of sensory perception. This is what detachment really is, as he's using it here, The imposition of a new rhythm or habit of reaction upon the cells of the brain, which renders the brain unaware of the lure. Notice that word lure with its connotation of a waiting type of imprisonment. When you think about the idea of a lure, it's weaponized. The fish may love the colorful structure of a lure which some knowledgeable fisherman has fashioned, but bite on it and you're hooked. And thus it is for human beings when they fasten their desire on certain attractions, they are grabbed by the sharp prongs of the lure. All right, that's one factor, detachment. In the methods of the Buddha, 3 methods whereby the personality can be changed. And okay, so detachment is first. We're going to, in this method, we're going to find detachment, dispassion, and discrimination. What I usually do when I look at it is I say discipline, dispassion, discrimination, decentralization for the entire personality, and then I apply a detachment to the attitude of the soul. And I wonder, should we or could we go beyond that using a word that began with a D? We have a sequence of meditation, and some of the words begin with the same letters, and maybe some do not. Concentration, meditation, contemplation, illumination, inspiration, initiation. Then, nothing is given for Aquarius. I call it universalization, or maybe I should call it inclusiveness, because somehow Aquarius manages to relate to all factors within the field of consciousness, followed by identification. So many eyes are there, And what I'm going to do so I don't forget that is so say, well, no, that's no good. When thinking of the sequence of the meditative stages, from Scorpio onwards, we could have illumination, this the Tibetan gives, inspiration, then initiation, yes, inclusiveness, and that is one that I'm looking at as a new thought. I had said universalization, but inclusion, maybe, and then identification. So the only one that is not an I, starting from that Scorpio starting point, is the one for Aquarius. And it is the sign of universality, of course, but if it is the sign of universality, then there's a great inclusiveness about it. Okay, now dispassion. Through dispassion, the emotional nature is rendered immune from the appeal of the senses, and desire fails to deter the soul from its rightful task. Okay, so he says less about it, but it's pithy and it is understandable, I think. So, excuse me, increasing the size through dispassion, always related to the astral body, right? The emotional nature is rendered immune from the appeal of the senses, like, oh, I want that, I have to have that, So he says, really, detach your desire nature from the phenomenal world. And by the phenomenal world, I suppose we're dealing either with the 18 lower subplanes or even possibly with 20 lower subplanes. I'm not sure about the highest of the subplanes on the mental plane, because that already enters the projection of the monad, which is the spiritual triad. Now, through discrimination, the mind learns to select the good, the beautiful, and the true, and to substitute these from the sense of identification with the personality, which is so characteristic of the majority of men. Personality holds so many in thrall, in prison. This has to go. So discrimination. Well, my task then is to find the right color, Pretty well been just alternating these colors. But he's saying something about discrimination which I haven't seen said before. Usually this discrimination is a question of what is the soul and what is the personality. Well, the soul does have the qualities of the good, the true, and the beautiful. So maybe we can link that fact with how he describes discrimination here. Through discrimination, the mind learns to select the good, the beautiful, and the true, and to substitute these for the identification with the personality. So, let's just say, recognition of oneself as a soul is facilitated through discrimination. So it's characteristic of so many people. What do you want? If in answer to that question, I want my personality to be happy, I want to have plenty of access to mental stimulation. I want to have agreeable and comfortable surroundings. I want my instinctual nature to be satisfied through a healthy body. Oh, there's nothing wrong with those things, but if one does not want that which lies beyond the satisfaction of the elemental nature, then, well, we just are not dealing with the good, the beautiful, and the true on any high level. These three attitudes, detachment, dispassion, and discrimination. Okay, so what I want to do here is obviously make our friend detachment a little bigger. Want to do that. A little bigger, a lot bigger. Too big. All right. You make something too big, it also, no, it also begins to fragment. Okay, so let's 1, 2, 3. And what I'll do is make this smaller. See what trouble I got myself into by exaggerating, by becoming too attached to the word detachment. All right, detachment, dispassion, discrimination. These three attitudes, notice attitudes, when correctly and sanely held, not over the top, will organize the personality, bring in the rule of wisdom, and prepare the disciple for initiation. So Buddhism has much to teach us, doesn't it? And, it's just ignorance that is held by one type of believer regarding the beliefs of another in a totally different religion. Those are the problems. Three attitudes, correctly and sanely held. That's what we're looking for. Then, he keeps alternating the work, I'll capitalize it, of the Buddha and the Christ. Then follows the work of the Christ, resulting in an understanding of the value of the individual. Maybe the religions that deal with a transcendental principle, and also some very wicked totalitarian formulations which deal with the preeminence of the state over any possible individual fulfillment. Maybe this is the kind of thing that pre-existed a real adherence to the Christ's idea of the value of the individual. Even in modern times, of course, the state in Russia and the state in Germany and so forth took over, and the individual counted for nothing unless, of course, you were one of the supreme elite following a megalomaniacal dictator. Megalomania is the height of illusion about the self. It is pretending that the part is the whole. And, obviously that can be true in a deeply esoteric sense, because the one fundamental principle, the great principle, the boundless, immutable principle, is indivisible. So the apparent part really is the whole, but this is done in a different way. It means the apparent part is the whole in essence. But when you have megalomania, you take that tiny whole in its formal aspect, the tiny part in its formal aspect, and you pretend it is the wholeness. maybe even greater than the rest of the whole. You know, when Hitler said after the war, or when it was all crashing in, the German people were not worthy of me. Oh, what does that show? What does that show? You know, maybe the most supreme case of megalomania that has appeared since, who knows, since the Roman emperors, and even then they did not have a world effect as he did. Excuse me. Then follows the work of the Christ, resulting in an understanding of the value of the individual and his self-initiated efforts at release and illumination with the objective of group goodwill. That's an important sentence because linked to the idea of the value of the individual is that he will make the effort to be released through illumination and will help to generate group goodwill. We learn to perfect ourselves in order to have somewhat to sacrifice to the group and thus enrich the group with our individual contribution. This is the first result of the activity of the Christ principle in the life of the individual. Personality fades out in the glory of the soul, like the rising sun, which, like the rising sun, blots out the darkness and irradiates the lower nature. This is the second result and is a group activity. So self-improvement and then group glory. Self-improvement and the glory of the group arrived at through individual contribution. So this is the second result, and as a group activity, the word goes forth to the initiates of the future: lose sight of self in group endeavor, forget the self in group activity, pass through the portal to initiation in group formation, and let the personality life be lost in group life. So important, and so indicative of what we all must do in the future. We should, take these things to heart and see, are we doing these things? The word goes forth to the initiates of the future. Lose sight of self in group endeavor, forget the self in group activity, pass through the portal to initiation in group formation. You take the hand of your fellow group member and suddenly the door of initiation is a lot wider than you thought it was at first when you tried to get through on your own as a little lower ego. And let the personality life be lost in the group life. This is the advice. And of course, this is what we have to do. So I think up here, basically, if I can get back to it, let's see if I can find these are group approaches and how God was viewed, and the third great approach that's coming, which will not exclude the Buddha and the Christ, but will add to it great avatars, I think. So this is the Buddha's mission. And then the Christ's mission, and how they embodied cosmic principles and found the way of release. So here we have this is the section related. This is the section related to that which below we were just studying, and we're on page 569 in the document. Of course, the document pages keep on changing, but the value of the individual we've just been over, and the group nature of the first initiation, and then truly, well, this is it: individual effort, group opportunity, and men's identification with each other. Such is the message of the Christ. Individual effort, group opportunity, and identification with each other. So maybe I can just put that in, if I can remember it, huh? So let's just say individual. Okay, the value of the individual, group effort, and identification with one's brother or sister, others. So this such is the message of the Christ. Individual effort, group opportunity, and men's identification with each other. So I'll make that not just group effort, but group opportunity and effort, let's say, and identification with one's brother or sister, with others, let's just say with others. And as DK says, such is the message of the Christ. Now, if we can really, really apply these things, our lives will be transformed, and we really will have the mind as it is in Christ, and we might as well say, extending it to the Lord of Light, the mind as it is in the Buddha. The final result of the work of the Christ is to be found in our identification with the whole. Okay, so this is the fourth step. Individuality, initiation, and identification. Initiation with the group. Let's just say a group opportunity. And let's just say adding in a kind of a third step here, which is their love of others. And number four, identification, with others, as the one. Identification as the one. So let's do it this way. This is number one. Initiation as a group opportunity, because all initiation is somehow really group initiation. And love of others is the three, the third, and four, identification as the one. So the attitude of, as it says in Gemini, the third stage has to do with love of the one. Let's check it out. And this would be Esoteric Astrology, page 332. And it would be right relation. I serve the one. I serve myself. I serve my brother. I begin to love my brother and my brothers, and then finally I serve the one. So we have the presentation of 3 steps and also of 4 steps. These are the terms in which the message of the Christ can be summarized. He said, when on earth I and my Father are one, and in these words epitomized his entire message. I, the individual, through initiation, am identified with deity. Oh, wow. This is really the heart of it all, isn't it? So these are the terms in which the message of the Christ can be summarized. And I and my Father are one, and that's the summary of the whole thing. And I'll just keep making these things bigger and bigger. But I do have limits. They might go off the page, and then the fragmentation begins again if you make something too big. I and my Father are one. And I'll just make that the summary of all his teaching. I and my Father are one. And in these words epitomized his entire message. I, the individual, through initiation with this group opportunity and through growing group love, am identified with deity, and let's call it deity, the one. This is very important material here, and it kind of, shows Christ as the great master of identification, and he knows above all, naught is but me. He knows this. Therefore we have the Buddha, the method, detachment, dispassion, discrimination, the Christ, the result, individualism, initiation, and identification. Oh, yes. This is very illuminating, don't you think so? And why the two of them really have to be considered together, and why we cannot reject either of them, as is sometimes the ignorant method. I was in, where was I? Not China, it was Nepal. I was in Kathmandu, and I went to a place where there were Buddhist monks, and I met a very prejudiced Buddhist monk, very prejudiced against Christians. And he just was putting down Jesus in every way he could. And I thought to myself, well, that's not exactly the picture that we have when we think of a Buddhist monk. And of course, we're used to the idea that Christians put down Buddhists, but it's all done in the veil of ignorance. It is interesting to note that the work of the Buddha is expressed in words all beginning with the 4th letter of the alphabet. I can see this. The letter D is the number 4. The sense of personality is achieved, the quaternary is transcended, and the Buddha gave us the reason for this transmutation and the rules. The work of the Christ is identified, is expressed for us in words beginning with the 9th letter of the alphabet, the letter I, and this number is the number of initiation, but not only that, it's the number of the human creative hierarchy. And 4 is also the number of the human creative hierarchy. If we begin counting from the very highest Piscean hierarchy on the cosmic astral plane, we'll reach the initiates, who are the human monads, at the number 9. If we begin counting from the cosmic physical plane, the divine flames, we will reach the number 4. So these things happen not idly, but all have their underlying purpose I'll show you what I mean in just a second here, because I think you can probably conceive of it. But so the fourth letter, I'm going to just make that a little bigger. And here's the ninth letter. All right. And you know what I would do here is, what would I do? I would go to this File Explorer, and I'd go to letter D, and I'd go to AAB diagrams, and I'd go to the unliberated well, I've got to go to the liberated and unliberated hierarchies. Okay. Does this give me what I want yet? I think I'm getting into trouble here. But I want to show you if this will only stop circulating. So here are the liberated hierarchies, and Pisces is at the top on the third sublevel of the cosmic astral plane. Count down and you have 5. But go to the next, the unliberated hierarchies. Add to 5, Leo, Virgo, Libra, and Scorpio. There's the human, and its number is 9. But start counting from the highest of the unliberated hierarchies, the divine flames, and you have 1, 2, 3, 4. Its number is 4. So the numbers 9 and 4 both relate to the hierarchy of human monads. And that's, as DK says, these things don't just happen. They are, in fact, they all have their underlying purpose. Well, there's some good things here, and I don't know whether I can go on or not. Maybe yes, maybe no. I'll just say, so far, 2 hours and 2 minutes. And we'll see whether there's time to go on and do a little more, or whether I just have to pause it at this point. Okay, friends, I think I will try to go on and do 1 more hour. We'll see if I succeed here. I have very briefly, says the Tibetan, and inadequately outlined the nature of 2 great approaches and 2 minor approaches. So, okay. Let's see if I can bring these in. Individualization, opportunity for initiation. This is not good. An opportunity for initiation. And then the minor ones, the Buddha and the Christ. These have prepared, okay, opportunity. These have prepared humanity for the third great approach, which will bring a new revelation with its realized consequences of a new heaven and new earth. Okay, and of course, we're not apparently saying too much about what that third great approach might be. At least I don't think the Tibetan's going to elaborate on it too much. It could include the avatar of synthesis and spirit of peace, along with the Christ and the Buddha. It would be a very powerful approach. I would ask the Orthodox theologian how he interprets the words "a new heaven." May it not signify an entirely new conception as to the world of spiritual realities? May it not be, and the very nature of God himself? May it not be possible that our present ideas of God as a universal mind, as love and will, may be enriched by a new idea and quality for which we have as yet no name or word, and of which we have as yet no faintest understanding? Each of the three present concepts as to the divine nature, the Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, have been entirely new when first sequentially presented to humanity. Well, he puts these questions up, and, it's not likely that anyone will engage with him immediately, but perhaps we can divine something about God immanent and God as one, which would be very ancient in a way, but relatively new in the West. Okay. Lurid green, I'm afraid. Okay. Okay. And stop highlighting. All right. So, what is this third major approach? What this third major approach will bring to humanity, we do not and cannot know. It will bring about as definite results as did the two earlier approaches. Of course, we know one thinks about the initiation of the human race into the fifth kingdom. First, there was the creation of humanity, the fourth kingdom. Then there was the opportunity to move towards the fifth kingdom through the process of initiation. And then there's the actual, maybe, entry of humanity in terms of a sufficient majority or a sufficient number to move it in terms of receptivity into the fifth kingdom. But, it's no use to try to decide what it will be when the Tibetan himself is hesitant to describe it and says we cannot really know. So what this third major approach will be to humanity, we do not and cannot know. All right. It will bring about as definite results as did the two earlier approaches. And does he mean the big ones, For some years now, the spiritual hierarchy has been drawing nearer to mankind, and this is responsible for the great concepts of freedom, which are so close to the hearts of men everywhere today and for which humanity is now fighting. Okay. As the members of the hierarchy approach closer to us, now here he seems to be identifying with humanity, although he is a member of the hierarchy, but maybe he's still in a way concealing that he is a master. It was revealed only later in the day, and that accidentally. As the members of the hierarchy approach closer to us, the dream of brotherhood, of fellowship, of world cooperation, and of peace based upon right human relations becomes clearer in our minds. As they draw nearer, we vision a new and vital world religion, a universal faith at one in its basic idealism with the past, but different in its modes of expression. So, even though the the diagram of triangles shows humanity reaching towards hierarchy, it's also true that the arrow moving in the opposite direction is now being energized. Okay, I have, okay, so this is the effect, and you know the three triangles here. The arrow does not show itself moving back, but this is the present, and obviously it's moving towards humanity as a whole. Otherwise, this arrow would have to, this two-way arrow would have to suddenly spring into existence in terms of hierarchy's relationship to humanity. All right. I have cited earlier the foundational truths upon which the New World religion will rest. There were 4 points, among which the fact of God was there, and the continuity of revelation was there. There were a couple of others as well. I would, well, let's see, maybe I can find them. This is 575. So, okay, revelation. No matches. Well, because that's the word is spelled. Revelation. Okay. So, I think there are too many to go looking for this. But the idea is 4 principles and 9 additional. So 4 foundational. Okay. Too many results to be shown. All right. Well, it's not important right now. You can find it, and I can find it too. Well, here we are. Managed to find it. The 4 foundational bases of the new revelation: the fact of God, man's relationship to God, the fact of immortality and eternal persistence, and the continuity of revelation and the divine approaches. Well, many religions today will accept these 4, but some with a peculiar twist which negates the validity of the acceptance. I think especially a frightened man clinging to his concrete-minded notions of deity and man's relationship to deity will reject the continuity of revelation and the divine approaches. Many religions like to say this teacher had the final word. That, of course, is a great heresy in a certain sense. The fact of immortality, dating from before birth, that would have to be included, and eternal persistence forever. Well, when you are going to exist eternally, persist eternally in hell, it's not very attractive, is it? So that obviously is a fear-laden conceptual limitation. Okay, but here we are. So those are the 4. Those are the 4 foundations. I have cited earlier the foundational truths upon which the New World religion will rest, and we've just taken a look at those. They were on 557, I think, in this document. We have just reviewed those: fact of God, man's relationship to God, immortality and eternal persistence, and the continuity of revelation through continuing great approaches. I would suggest that the theme of the coming religion will be that of the great approaches themselves, that it will emphasize anew God's love for man as evidenced in these divine approaches, and also man's response to God as the word goes forth. Draw near unto God, and he will draw near unto you. And of course, that applies to the Christ and to any great teacher. That it will, in its rites and ceremonies, because it is a seventh-ray age after all, that we are entering with rites and ceremonies, be concerned with the invocation and invocative and evocative side of spiritual appeal. Okay, so the four foundational truths, we just have to remember them, as I managed to forget them in just a few pages, but the fact of God, the fact of man's relationship to God, the immortality of the soul and eternal persistence, and then the continuity of revelation through the divine approaches. Man invokes the divine approach in two ways, maybe any divine approach, by means of the inchoate voiceless appeal or invocative cry of the masses. And remember that, these had to be correlated, that of the masses, and also by planned, defined invocation of the spiritually oriented aspirants. And we recall that one of these alone would not be enough to reach the high sources from which the evocation or response could come. So the planned, defined invocation of the spiritually oriented aspirants, the intelligently convinced worker, disciple, and initiate, by all, in fact, who form the new group of world servers, and, the workers, the disciples, and the initiates do form the new group of world servers. As for the spiritually oriented aspirants, well, maybe not yet, but sometimes the definition of the world servers is so widened that it seems to include them as well. So this section is all about how to participate in invoking the divine approaches. When they have occurred, two major, two very strong but still minor, and a third to come at a time that is not yet given. The science of invocation and evocation will take the place of what we now call prayer and worship. Be not disturbed by the use of the word science. It is not the cold and heartless intellectual thing so often depicted. It is in reality the intelligent organization of spiritual energy and of the forces of love, and when effective, will evoke the response of spiritual beings who can again walk openly among men, i.e. the hierarchy, I suppose, at the very least, and thus establish a close relation and a constant communication between humanity and the spiritual hierarchy. So I think this is the important point, and it will be typical of it will typify the New World religion, and people will say, well, where's the heart? Meaning, where's the solar plexus, Some will not like it at first. But then he, already sensing the reaction of the more specifically 2, 4, 6 types, he gives science the dignity it deserves. Science, so science is in reality the intelligent organization of spiritual energy and of the forces of love, and when effective will evoke the response of beings who can again, it has to be the hierarchy, walk openly among men and thus establish a close relation and a constant communion between hierarchy and humanity. So when the Christ directed that stream of invocative energy towards the higher sources coming from the masses and also from the trained workers, he was working with occult science. In other words, there is science is also certainty of knowledge regarding method and technique. So, method and technique. So rather than just fish around for a possible way of doing something, those who know can be very effective because they know the methods and the techniques of how to handle energy for the best result within humanity and the best result regarding the divine plan. It will be obvious to you that as humanity, through its most advanced units, prepares for this next approach, it must accept with faith and conviction, faith for the masses and conviction for the knowers and the new group of world servers, the premises stated above. And here are, here again are the 4 foundations stated in a somewhat different manner. The fact of God, in this case, God transcendent, and then man's relationship to God, which is God immanent. The fact of immortality, yes, eternal continuance, and the brotherhood of man, God in expression. Now, in this, the 4th one is usually considered to be the way of the continuity of Revelation. And then actually there are 6, really, aren't there? Because he added 2 more, so I didn't mention them again when reviewing that. The existence of the way to God, and we might call this the path, and the number 6, the historicity of the 2 great approaches and the possibility of a third and imminent approach. Great approach. That's what so I should have, mentioned all 6 when searching for remembering the 4, but here they are. And these are the principles which must be taught to those who want to have a solid foundation as they approach divinity and do not want to wander off into error. The fact of God, God transcendent, man's relationship to God or the divine, God immanent, God within us entirely, and God as the pure, one and only being in cosmos. The fact of immortality or eternal persistence, I think as it says, okay. And the brotherhood of man, God in expression. Well, there is, we have to remember here something he mentioned as number 4 before, ongoing, ongoing revelation and continuous approaches. Okay, eternal persistence. Then the path, which the more intelligent and sensitive people have become aware of, and then looking to the past for evidence of great approaches in the night of time, really, as far as we are concerned. Our history regarding humanity doesn't seem to go back that far, and also the recent approaches of the two transmitting avatars, the Buddha and the Christ. And what will the third approach be, and will it be a great approach? Will it be a great approach? It seems that way, and will be important in elevating humanity into the fifth kingdom. Not all, but in general. Okay, so elevating humanity into the fifth kingdom of nature. It is here that the churches, if regenerated, and that's a big question, there was a big reform in Catholicism with Pope John the 23rd, but this was written even, 20 years or so before he became the Pope. It is here that the churches, if regenerated, can concentrate their efforts, cease perpetuating the outer and visible form. They do have the sixth ray mind. It has the sixth ray mind, the Catholic Church, and the sixth ray astral body, and the seventh ray physical body, and the third ray personality, all of which may be involved in the perpetuating of the outer invisible form, and begin to deal with the reality underlying all dogmas and doctrines. That's it. How superficial are we, and are we willing to drop our superficiality and go more deeply to the causal level behind the outer appearances? But then again, the church is used. People use the church to satisfy their own personal desires, just as they can, use any edifice, the Masonic edifice or the educational edifice. They can use these high systems, which are meant to really elevate humanity, simply to satisfy their own personal desires, their own lower ego. Upon these inner assurances, man must take his stand and study, and a study of them will reveal that the majority of the unthinking masses, an immense majority, do accept them, hopefully and with desire, though without any definite understanding, and that a steadily increasing minority also accept them with a full, convinced awareness, based upon reasoning, let us say, and intuition, an awareness of that is the result of the transformation of hope into self-proven fact. They have wrestled with the idea, and they've come up with justification that convinces them. So it becomes more than just a hope. In between these two extremes is a large group, agnostic people, questioning people. They are not part of the unintelligent mass, nor are they yet either occultists, mystics, or even aspirants. They question and seek conviction, some kind of certainty to which they can adhere. They repudiate faith as unintelligent, but long for a substitute. They are constantly emerging out of the mass of men and constantly moving forward in consciousness through the following of spiritual techniques, eventually taking their stand among those who can say with St. Paul, I know whom I have believed. It is with these techniques that the true religious teaching should primarily concern itself. So who can we reach? Who can you reach? Who can I reach? How shall we reach? And maybe, if we're along the 2-6 line somehow prominently, we will want to reach people whose conception of contact with the higher sources and energies is wanting to a great degree and illogical and childish, but you can't really begin a conversation that way, can you? I'd like to address your illogical, childish apprehension of your religion. You can't do that. So there is a way, however, to lead people forward to the next revelation, realizing that we who are interested in occultism, who support occultism, have been in lives past just where these other folks find themselves now. And who knows what the level of our ignorance of the inner realities has been. Some very intelligent people, intelligent maybe in a more worldly sense, are certainly ignorant of the inner realities. A group of questioning people thus is found in the center. And so it's good to, they are not the convinced aspirants, mystics, and esotericists, occultists who have emerged out of a semi-intelligent grouping, and they aren't the masses either. But it's interesting that oftentimes the masses are less distorted in their beliefs than are the people who are in the in-between position. There has been some kind of distortion of natural recognition of the truth. And so the people who no longer believe as the so-called unthinking people believe have actually wandered farther from the truth. So the fact of God, man's relationship to the divine, the fact of immortality, the brotherhood of man, and, through ongoing revelation, as we come closer and closer to realizing the nature of that brotherhood, the existence of the way to God, the path, and the fact that in the past, in the historical past, two great approaches and two relatively minor approaches, though powerful, have already been made, and we look forward to and anticipate a third approach, just as we look forward to Master DK's teaching, a third installment of his magnificent teaching. I'm doing my best here to keep my chronometer from exploding. I have a little bit of a subtle warfare going on here between this chronometer and my production of the programs. And I don't mean to be paranoid, but I think it seeks to mislead me. Who will win here, or does it really make any difference? Anyway, as we look ahead into the world of tomorrow and begin to question what structure the faith of humanity should assume and what building the skill of the knowers will erect to house the religious spirit of man, what temple will we raise? Three more fundamental truths appear to be emerging as necessary adjuncts to the body of revealed truth. So this is future and addition of three more fundamental truths. Okay. Three more fundamental truths will appear to be emerging as necessary adjuncts to the revealed body of truth. Certainly, we have to exercise our discriminative manus, hopefully fed by the light of the soul, to find truth here, rather than the constant, the concrete-minded and even childish errors that are so prominent in the thinking of, so many people who do not use their minds to inquire into these matters. And these three more fundamental truths, what are they? Let us see. The demonstrated existence of a spiritual hierarchy, the life purpose of which is the good of humanity. To the Christian, we can call it Christ and his church, or the inner church triumphant, just as long as the name evokes with some accuracy the truth of the situation. The members of the hierarchy are seen to be the custodians of the divine plan and expressions of the love of God. You see, we must find these ideas or thoughts which will not be immediately rejected as against what the Bible suggests. And we also need to cure ourselves of that disease of gullibility where we imagine that in the English language and its many translations, you have or versions, you have the inerrancy of the Bible. That is a very misleading and thwarting kind of doctrine. I remember some years ago, I heard a prominent preacher in Virginia speak of that, and he did seem to adopt quite an attitude of certainty, but I feel that it was simply covering up his own insecurity regarding whether the Bible or not, in all of its many versions, was inerrant word for word. It just doesn't make sense. It's not logical. And Alice Bailey discovered that early on when she was looking at some of the translations from Aramaic, maybe to Greek, or I don't know what other languages the translations may have occurred into. But she says, no, there's no way you become a translator and you know that we're not dealing with inerrancy. She didn't use that word, but that's what she meant. Okay, so three more fundamental truths. The demonstrated existence of the spiritual hierarchy, the life purpose of which is the good of humanity. Now, question yourself, how foundational a principle, how great a conviction is it in your psyche that the hierarchy truly exists and that it has the good of humanity at heart and that it is possible for you to establish individually and with your group a direct relation with a master of the wisdom and his ashram? Is this a theory? Is it an article of faith? Yeah, I have faith in that. Is it a conviction based on your best thought? Or is it a certainty based upon experience? Obviously, the position that we want to establish is one of certainty based upon experience. And of course, that door is open to us just the way it is open to us to prove all the assertions in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. One doesn't expect simply an intellectual knowledge of these things. Intellectual knowledge is still, as it were, knowledge at a distance. It is not sufficiently intimate with, let us say, the facts upon which it is speculating. So the next thing, the next of the, what does he call them here? 3 more fundamental truths. 3 more, if I forget something, I make it bigger, fundamental truths. So, the demonstrated existence of the spiritual hierarchy, the development of the science of invocation and evocation as the method of approach to divinity. This is the new and coming science, and it is a science, and science in a way of certain and reliable and dependable knowledge. See, there's the science of discovery, of course, but there's also the science of the use of that which is deemed to be factual and even known to be factual. The right and intelligent use of the facts of the case. So this science of invocation and evocation, this will grow out of the ancient habits of prayer as used by the masses. And because, people say, oh, if you pray, the prayer will be answered. And, people who are members of the relatively unthinking masses, they come up with an assertion like that, and they mean it because they have had maybe experiences which prove that that is true if they have been unselfish in their prayers. Isn't there that song, oh God, won't you buy me a Mercedes Benz? Something, I don't know. I think that might not be the unselfish use of prayer. Will you get your Mercedes? That's the question. Some of the wealth-centered churches would say, yeah, you will get your Mercedes, and if you don't, it'll prove that God doesn't love you. And a lot of this, I can't say it started with Calvinism, but he had strong Cancer influence and Taurus influence in his chart, and, it can be quite materialistic. And in some ways, it was, so that DK said he was responsible for some really unhelpful doctrines, including one very damnable doctrine of the elect, that God decided ahead of your birth whether you would be saved or not, and there was nothing you could do about it. Really. And of course, when you think that logical thinkers, following the laws as they understand it of their own logic, arrive at conclusions like that, you begin to hope that intuition dawns rapidly to save us from what Moria calls the cerebral sinuosity of the brain. Anyway, here's this science, and this will grow out of the ancient habits of prayer. Prayer and meditation are the preliminary steps to this emerging science, and what is vaguely called worship is the group effort to establish some form of united approach to the spiritual hierarchy. Usually you can maybe worship God on your own, but when you gather together with others who are like-minded and you go to a worship service with others, we see the group dimension. So worship has something to do with a group effort to establish some form of united approach to the spiritual hierarchy, or at least to God, or some of the higher sources, functioning under the guidance and control of the Christ, and related to the highest spiritual center, Shambhala, through its most advanced individuals, just as humanity is related to the hierarchy by spiritually minded people. So well, worship is not entirely discounted. Master Moria rather discounts it. He says, please don't use the word worship, use the word imitation. It says, don't talk to me about the worship of the Christ, talk to me about the imitation of the Christ as set forward in the book by Thomas à Kempis, The Imitation of the Christ. That was, in my younger days, I used to chase after bookmobiles because I lived out in the country, and that was the way to get library books. And I remember when The Imitation of the Christ fell into my hands, it was like a recapitulation of mystical work, and it was a wonderful little book. And then later to come and see Master Moria supporting the value of that book. It was a moment. So this science, as always, there seems to be something wrong here. So this science will grow out of the ancient habits of prayer as used by the masses, and the practice of meditation as developed by the mystics and occultists. And these are preliminary steps to this great science of invocation and evocation. And there's, worship is dignified here a little bit. And what is vaguely called worship, is the group effort to establish some form of united approach to the spiritual hierarchy functioning under the guidance and control of the Christ and related to the highest spiritual center Shambhala through its most advanced individuals, hierarchies, most advanced individuals, just as humanity is related to the hierarchy by the spiritually minded people. So I'll make that just a little bit bigger because it's quite important. And then the third of these fundamental truths, the existence, the demonstrated existence of the spiritual hierarchy. I guess it needs to be a little bigger. And then the science of invocation and evocation, development of these fundamental. This is the second fundamental truth, which is added to the earlier 4. And remember, he also added 9 other steps to the earlier 4. And then the realization that the starry heavens, the solar system, and the planetary spheres are all of them the manifestations of great spiritual lives, and that the interrelation between these embodied lives is as real and effectual as is the relation between members of the human family. Well, this will give a new perspective on astrology. You know that in Christianity, the astrologers and soothsayers are to be shunned and given no encouragement and no attention for various spurious reasons, but not because they are considered to be the embodiment of great lives. We have such a narrow point of view that we begin to think that man is the only living, intelligent being in the universe. I mean, it's just simply absurd. I suppose someone would come along with mathematical probability and show how very improbable such a position would be. So when you look up and you see a planet and you see a star and you see a constellation, do you sense behind it the Lord of such a planet, star, or constellation? So the manifestation of great embodied lives. I remember having a discussion with a friend, and he said, well, constellations are just how we see aggregations of stars from our angle. They don't have any relationship. Those stars don't really have any relationship to each other. And then all of a sudden we looked further and we found, the Lord of the constellation Aries. What's this? The Lord of the constellation Libra, and on and on. He mentions it, that lordship, a few times in relation to certain constellations, and not to all, but you get the idea that these aggregations of stars relatively close to each other, and not just because of a visual artifact from Earth, really are pervaded by a great intelligence who works through them. Well, then there's got to be what, the Lord of some kind of a super system in which constellations are chakras, and then the Lord of a system in which those ones about whom naught may be said are chakras, and on it goes. When you look at well, let's see here. If I go here to number D and F, and I go to some of Tuya's charts, diagrams, we'll see right here that there are great circles, and who's the Lord of these seven? Well, it's the Lord of the constellation of the Great Bear. Well, who's the Lord of this one? It's a one about whom naught may be said, but then there are seven of them contained in what I've sometimes called a sub-parabrahmanic logos. And that has a Lord, and then the seven of those sub-parabrahmanic logoi has a Lord, and that the seven sub-parabrahmanic logoi, yes, they have the Lord of a cosmic parabrahm, but you just know there's going to be seven of those, and seven, and on it goes. And every super system will have its own intelligent, willing, loving regulator. The Lord of a galaxy, okay, why not? Why not? The Lord of a family of galaxies, why not? And on it will go into divisions which it would be a risk to name, a risk to accuracy anyway, but on it goes until finally in all the universe there is but one Lord of the entire universe, who is a minuscule demonstration of the absolute infinite deity, because every Lord of a universe is a finitude, although essentially an infinitude. And so we break the universe and we find again the absolute infinite deity. Yeah. Okay, so these are three that have to be added to the foundational four. And then 9 were added earlier. So 4 and 9 is 13, and 3 is 16. So you begin to wonder, is there a throat center somewhere involved in all this? So we always, thank goodness one can reclaim it, always we have 4 plus 9, and now plus 3. Oh goodness, look at all this. Always we have 4 plus 9 plus 3, and this equals 16. So these are foundational factors of the new world religion. Maybe the 9 listed above are not quite as important, but he says they have to be added to the foundational 4, and now we come to 3 more that we've just been considering, which are fundamental truths. There's a lot to take into consideration. The spiritual hierarchy of the planet the ability of mankind to contact its members and to work in cooperation with them, notice these capitalizations, and the existence of the greater hierarchy of spiritual energies of which are planetary spheres apart, I mean the logoi of the sacred and non-sacred planets. These are the three truths upon which the coming world religion will be based. Well, okay. Three truths presented differently in this paragraph. So up here, the three are presented as the spiritual hierarchy, the science of invocation and evocation, and the realization of the lives in the starry heavens. What does he call them here? Well, the spiritual hierarchy is first, and the ability of mankind to contact its members, maybe that's invocation and evocation, and the existence of the greater hierarchies, I would say, of spiritual energies, of which are tiny planetary spheres apart. Our solar system, but then the system of solar systems and the system of cosmic logois. These are the three truths, and let's just say worded differently, and let's say even slightly differently in this slightly differently in this paragraph. So these are the factors. These are the three truths upon which the coming religion may be based. He keeps on repeating things in a different way, and maybe it will confuse us, and maybe it will really help us get it. So I'll put it here, three foundational truths worded differently than above. The spiritual hierarchy, that's pretty much the same. The ability of mankind to contact through invocation and evocation its members and to work in cooperation with them, and the existence of the greater hierarchy of spiritual energies as the beings in a solar system, and then considering the starry heavens of spiritual beings. These are the truths to be added to the foundational four, in addition to the other 9, which I don't want to go back right now and find, or should I? If I go to 557, only one result. So that can't be correct. See, all that has yet to be done, doesn't it? Goodness. We're halfway through the book, but all this has yet to be done. Okay, there we are. Actually, what I'm realizing here is my numbers. It should have been 4 or 6 plus 9 plus 3, and then the number would be 18. And we begin to connect that with the 18 subplanes, which we're always having to consider as the environment of our expression. So he added to the 4 2 more, and then 9 more, and then the 3 here, fundamental truths. Well, I've been doing a little searching for the 9 that followed the 4, but I'm not being too successful anyway. We know it's here because we did it together. And there's just a little more to do. So we add to the 4 plus 2, or the 6, we add another 9 plus these 3 points having to do with fundamental truths, all of them upon which the new world religion can be based. Okay, the relationship to God through Christ has ever been the teaching of the spiritual leaders of the world, no matter by what name they call him. In the future, we shall draw closer and more intelligently to the living substance of reality and be more definite in our apprehension of this hitherto sensed relationship. We shall know and see and understand. We shall not just believe, have hope, and try to comprehend. It's like the Tibetans' elaboration on Paul's through a glass darkly statement. We shall speak openly of the hierarchy and of its members and their work, the hierarchical nature of all spiritual lives, and the fact of the great chain of hierarchies stretching all the way up from the mineral kingdom through the human and the kingdom of God to apparently remote spiritual groups will be emphasized. Then there will open for the spiritual lives what has been called the way of higher evolution, and much along these lines has been given out during the past 2 centuries. The fact of the existence of the hierarchy is consciously recognized by hundreds of thousands today, though still denied by the orthodox. The general public are familiar with the idea of the existence of the masters and either gullibly accept the mass of futile and idiotic information handed out by many today, or fight furiously against the spread of this teaching. Others are open-minded enough to investigate whether the teaching is true and to follow the techniques suggested in the hope that hypothesis may turn to fact. This last group is steadily increasing in number, and upon their accumulating evidence, belief can be translated into knowledge. So many know the truth today. So many people of integrity and worth are cooperating consciously with masters of this hierarchy that the very foundations of the ecclesiastical antagonisms and the belittling comments of the concrete mind are of no avail. What the orthodox theologian and the narrow doctrinaire have to offer no longer satisfies the intelligent seeker or suffices to answer his questions. He is shifting his allegiances into wider and more spiritual areas. He is moving out from under doctrinal authority into direct personal spiritual experience and coming under the direct authority which contact with Christ and his disciples, the masters, give. Well, okay, I think that's all I can do right now. So, this will be, we'll say this is the end of program 40, and we have 3 hours and about 2 minutes into it. I'll try to find that the 9 that followed the 4. I don't know why I should have lost it right now, but maybe it's what I do to the text. Anyway, we're on page 418, and I will go back to find Okay, so we're at the end here, and it is the end of program 40, 3 hours and 2 minutes approximately, or 3 minutes. And we have worked from page, right. So we reached from 409 to 418. March 5th we'll begin whenever we can again, and hopefully before the conference. And we're on page 418, which is where we will continue. The second point was all about the science of invocation, and the first point was the demonstration of the spiritual hierarchy. And the third point, added to the four, was the realization of the ensouled lives, the hylozoistic point of view that all the starry heavens are demonstrations of ensouled lives. So we'll start with number 41 next time, whenever that will be, and we will continue. Thank you, everybody, for being here, and somehow I will find those 9 points. I'm sorry that I have not succeeded, but they're there, or maybe there are 7 and a 2. Anyway, we know that the foundation of the New World religion depends on a certain platform, and we want to participate in making that platform possible, to demonstrate it as part of the teaching, to pass it on, and to come into a deeper understanding of it ourselves. So, okay, I'll get this out to you as soon as I can, and many blessings, and we'll see you as soon as I can manage it. Bye-bye.